The sun hovered low over the auction yard, casting long shadows that crawled across rusted fences and half-empty pens. Dust danced in the dying light, kicked up by restless hooves and indifferent boots. A chorus of desperate whinnies echoed against the cracked walls, pleading for a fate they couldn't understand. Somewhere in that chaos, half-frenzied, half-forgotten, stood a horse that nobody wanted. He was the last one in the ring, barely able to hold his own weight. His coat, once likely a proud chestnut, was now matted and streaked with filth. His head hung low, eyes clouded over with something between sorrow and exhaustion. His ribs protruded like scaffolding beneath torn skin, and a deep gash marred his right flank. The crowd, once animated with chatter and speculation, fell into an awkward silence as the auctioneer cleared his throat. "Lot 47, he announced, his voice thin. "One gelding, unregistered. Age uncertain. Injured. Starting bid at $50. No hands moved. The only sound was a cough from the far end of the bleachers and the shuffle of someone's boot on the planks. The auctioneer hesitated, glanced at the time, and adjusted his hat. He didn't need to explain. Everyone there knew what it meant when a horse didn't fetch even $50. The truck waiting out back didn't take horses to new homes. A boy stood leaning against a fence post near the edge of the arena, half hidden behind a tall man in a denim jacket. Not quite a boy, but not yet fully a man either. His name was Eli. 17, maybe 18. His jeans were worn through at the knees, and his boots were a mismatched pair he'd salvaged from the church donation box. He had a look about him, quiet, intense, as though the world had been speaking too loudly for too long and he'd learned to listen to what went unsaid. Eli didn't flinch as the auctioneer repeated the call. He was staring at the horse. Where others saw a bag of bones, Eli saw something else. Not the gleam of potential, not even the chance at redemption, just something familiar. He knew that look. The way the horse held its breath like life had taught him it was dangerous to be noticed. Eli had lived that once too. The bruises on his memory still throbbed whenever he saw pain dressed in silence. "Come on," the auctioneer muttered to himself. "Gonna have to move on." "I'll take him," Eli said quietly. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. Heads turned. Some snorted, others scoffed. "Waste of money," a heavy-set man whispered, not quite low enough. A woman in a floral vest laughed beneath her breath. The auctioneer blinked. "You serious?" Eli nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out 2 20s and a wrinkled 10. "That's all I got." The man squinted at the boy, then looked back at the horse. He sighed, muttered something about paperwork, and waved his hand. "Sold." No applause followed. Only the creak of wood as people stood to leave, the day's entertainment done. But Eli didn't move. He walked slowly toward the ring where the horse stood, shaking slightly, legs trembling like reeds in wind. As Eli drew closer, the horse lifted his head, barely. Their eyes met. There was no movie moment, no magical spark. Just a deep, mutual recognition. Eli reached out a hand, open-palmed and steady. The horse didn't come forward, but he didn't flinch either. That was enough. "He's broken," a voice behind Eli said. It was the auctioneer, stacking papers. "You know that, right? Can't be ridden. Probably hasn't eaten properly in weeks. Might be too late." Eli didn't turn. "So was I once." The man said nothing after that. With some effort, they managed to load the horse onto Eli's old flatbed trailer. The tires sagged under the added weight, and the tailgate barely held together. The horse stepped up only after Eli whispered something into his ear, a language only the two of them understood. The drive back was slow. The road to Eli's small farm twisted through hills that had once belonged to a larger ranch, long since sold off in pieces. What remained now was a patch of land held together by memory and barbed wire. The barn leaned slightly to the left, like an old man too tired to stand straight, but it was dry and quiet. A place to start over. Eli opened the trailer gate and the horse stepped out cautiously. He limped a few steps, then paused, eyes scanning the empty field. No other horses. No people shouting. No fences tight enough to feel like prison walls. Just sky, dirt, and the low whistle of the wind. Eli led him slowly to a stall filled with fresh straw, water, and feed. The horse looked at it like he wasn't sure it was real. He didn't eat, not yet. Just stood in the corner, staring. Eli sat just outside the stall, his back against the wooden wall, arms resting over his knees. He said nothing. He just stayed. Night came. A moonless one. The stars flickered in scattered clusters, like hope trying to find a pattern. Crickets sang in the tall grass. The horse finally lay down, not fully, just enough to stop pretending he wasn't tired. "You're not gonna die here," Eli whispered. "Not like that." He didn't expect a response. Eli's world had never been full of gentle things. His father had been a drinker, quick with fists and slower with forgiveness. His mother left when he was 10. He'd grown up learning silence was safer than honesty. But there'd been one horse when he was a child, a mare named June. She'd been the first creature to look at him like he mattered. He still remembered the way she'd stand guard outside the window when he cried himself to sleep. June had been taken away one winter by men with trucks and no hearts. Eli hadn't cried after that. Not until today. By morning, the horse had eaten half the feed. Eli didn't smile, but his eyes lit just a little. He set about his chores, checking fences, fixing the drip in the old water line, mending the roof with second-hand shingles. By noon, the horse had drunk deeply from the trough. By evening, he was standing a little straighter. When it came time to name him, Eli hesitated. Names mattered. They carried weight. Finally, he said, "Valor." The horse flicked an ear. "You don't see it now," Eli continued, "but it's in you. I can feel it." Over the next week, their rhythm grew. Eli learned the horse's scars, how he flinched at sudden movement, how he trembled when touched near the flank, how he froze at loud noises. He never raised a hand, never used force. He moved slow, patient, offering nothing but presence. The townsfolk noticed eventually. They always did. Word spread fast in small places. "Boy brought home a dead horse," one man said at the diner. "He's trying to save what can't be saved," another chuckled. But one old rancher leaned back in his chair and murmured, "Sometimes, the ones you bet against are the ones that teach you the most." Still, not everyone was content to let the boy play hero. One afternoon, a white pickup truck rumbled into the driveway. A man stepped out, tall, clean-shaven, wearing a badge. Animal welfare. Someone had reported Eli for harboring a suffering animal. "I just want to have a look," the officer said. Eli said nothing. He led the man to the barn, where Valor stood alert, ears forward. He looked thin, yes, but he was no longer the ghost that had stumbled out of the auction yard. The officer watched for a while. Then he turned to Eli. "You really think you can bring this one back?" "I don't think," Eli replied. "I believe." That night, Eli stayed up late, sitting outside Valor's stall, sketching plans on the back of a feed sack. Ideas for a paddock, training ground, better shelter. He had no money. But he had time. And he had Valor. The wind blew cold, carrying the scent of pine and possibility. In the dark, the boy and the broken horse shared a silence that wasn't empty, it was full of things unspoken, of trust unearned but offered anyway. Tomorrow would come. And with it, the long road ahead. But tonight they had this. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. Morning light seeped into the barn through gaps in the wooden slats, laying golden stripes across Valor's back. His coat, though still dull, was cleaner now, brushed gently each evening by Eli's quiet hands. The wound on his flank was healing slowly, a patch of pink replacing the angry red. It wasn't pretty, but it was progress. And in that humble little barn, progress felt like a victory. Eli moved methodically, filling the feed bucket, refreshing the water, and checking the wrap on Valor's leg. Every movement was purposeful, calm. The routine had become sacred, something that grounded both of them. There was something unspoken between boy and horse now, something fragile and sacred. Neither pushed the other. They simply existed together. After finishing in the barn, Eli stepped into the yard and looked out at the field. He'd cleared the eastern paddock the day before, ripping out rusted fencing with his bare hands, dragging away dead branches, leveling the earth with a worn rake. He'd barely slept, but exhaustion didn't concern him. Not when something finally mattered. He didn't have many tools, but he had a hammer, some bent nails, and the splinters to prove his commitment. That day, he planned to extend the fencing and give Valor space to move freely. He wanted to see the horse walk without fear, maybe even trot. A foolish hope, some might say. But not to Eli. Back inside, Valor watched him approach with steady eyes. The flinches had faded, replaced by something cautious yet curious. Eli opened the gate and let the gelding walk beside him out into the field. The horse took tentative steps, ears flicking. His hooves touched the soft soil and hesitated, but then, one by one, he ventured farther. Eli stood quietly watching. He didn't call out or push him. He knew better than to rush trust. Valor stopped near a patch of sunlit grass and lowered his head to graze. It was the first time he'd done that outside the stall. Eli swallowed hard, fighting the lump in his throat. He knelt down and touched the earth beside him, letting the silence wrap around them. Later, Eli sat on the porch with a notebook open on his knee. The pages were filled with drawings and scattered ideas. Sketches of better stalls, a list of supplies he couldn't afford, and words he didn't know if he'd ever say aloud. Across the top of the page he'd scrawled one goal: give Valor a reason to believe again. But hope alone didn't patch a roof or pay for hay. By sundown, Valor had begun exploring the paddock, limping less with each pass. That night, Eli fed him an extra scoop of oats and whispered stories as he worked, a habit he'd picked up, unsure whether the horse listened or simply appreciated the calm. Eli talked about his father's silence, the bruises he carried into school under long sleeves. He spoke of June, the old mare with warm eyes and a will stronger than steel. How he'd lost her the same week his mother vanished. How he'd survived his childhood with the memory of a horse that never left his side, until men in suits came and took her away. Valor didn't react, but something shifted in the air, a quiet acknowledgement. Over the next few days, Valor gained strength. He still walked with a slight limp, but the skeletal frame began to fill in. His coat shimmered slightly under the sun, and his ears perked up more often. One morning, Eli caught him stretching his neck over the stall door, watching birds flutter in the rafters. A small thing, but a sign of life. Not everyone believed in the change. Down at the feed store, whispers followed Eli wherever he went. "That boy's wasting time," said one rancher, leaning on a sack of grain. "Horse like that? Better off put down. He's trying to be some kind of miracle worker," another added, spitting tobacco into a dented can. Eli didn't respond. He simply loaded the cheapest hay he could find and paid in crumpled bills. As he turned to leave, the store owner, a grizzled man with clouded eyes, called out, "Not everyone sees what you see, kid. Doesn't mean it ain't real." Eli nodded once and walked out. Back at home, he hung an old tarp over the barn's south side to shield it from the wind. That evening, as a cold front rolled in, Valor stayed warm. Eli wrapped himself in a frayed quilt on the barn floor and kept watch. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. One night, as the wind howled and rain battered the tin roof, Valor panicked. Thunder cracked, and the horse bolted in his stall, eyes wide, slamming against the boards. Eli jumped up and opened the gate, stepping inside without hesitation. He didn't grab a rope or raise his voice. Instead, he stood still, arms loose, voice low. "You're safe now. You're not back there. You're here." Valor trembled, muscles taut. But he didn't bolt. He stood, breathing hard, and eventually lowered his head. Eli reached up and rested a hand against the damp cheek. They stood there for a long time, side by side in the flickering lantern light, as the storm raged around them. The next morning, Eli made a decision. He needed to give Valor more than survival. He needed to give him purpose. There was an annual horse event scheduled in the nearby county. Riders came from miles around. There was no prize money for most categories, just ribbons, recognition, and a crowd that judged hard and clapped louder. The event wasn't just a showcase. It was a challenge. Eli pulled the flyer from the bulletin board outside the co-op and studied it under the buzzing light. Most of the horses featured on the poster looked like models: perfect coats, proud gaits, flawless lines. Valor was none of that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But Eli didn't care about ribbons. He just wanted the world to see what belief could rebuild. He circled the date with a black pen. That night, he brought Valor a thick blanket and brushed him down longer than usual. The horse closed his eyes at the touch, breathing slow and deep. Eli leaned against the stall door and looked at him. "I don't care if they laugh. I don't care if we finish last. I just want them to see you. The real you. Not what you were. What you are." Valor flicked an ear and shifted closer. The days that followed were filled with preparation. Eli rigged a simple training area from hay bales and fence posts. They practiced slow walks at first, then smooth turns. Valor stumbled often, and more than once he spooked at sudden sounds or shifting shadows. But he kept going. So did Eli. They learned each other's rhythms. Eli learned that Valor responded better to gentle touch than voice. Valor learned to trust the reins, not as commands, but as guidance. Every tiny breakthrough felt like triumph. Every setback was another chance to try again. One morning, while guiding Valor through a tight circle, Eli caught sight of his reflection in the trough water. Mud-streaked face, tired eyes, but something else too: conviction. The kind he hadn't known he had. Later that evening, he sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting the paddock in amber light. Valor moved slowly but steadily across the field. He wasn't limping anymore. Eli watched him, heart steady. The world outside hadn't changed. The whispers still followed him. The barn still leaked. The fridge still held more empty space than food. But he had Valor. And Valor had him. A bond born not from perfection, but from the raw, quiet choice to keep going. As twilight deepened, Eli whispered a promise into the fading light. "We're not done." And somewhere in the darkness, it felt like the story was just beginning. The morning of the event arrived cloaked in a soft mist, the kind that blurred the line between dream and reality. Eli stood at the edge of the paddock, brushing down Valor with slow, deliberate strokes. The gelding stood still, calmer than ever before, his coat catching the weak sunlight as it began to pierce through the fog. The boy's hands trembled only slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of everything this moment had come to represent. He fastened the halter carefully, checking the buckles twice, then 3 times. The trailer they'd borrowed from a neighbor creaked as Eli led Valor up the ramp. The horse hesitated at first, glancing sideways into the dark hollow of the trailer. Eli stepped alongside him, whispered a few soft words, and walked in first. Valor followed. The drive to the fairgrounds was long and winding, the kind that seemed to stretch time. The old truck coughed and sputtered on steep hills, but it never stopped. Eli gripped the wheel tighter with each passing mile. He didn't expect a win. What he wanted couldn't be measured in ribbons or cheers. What he wanted was for someone, anyone, to look at Valor and see what he saw. At the entrance, the fairgrounds buzzed with energy. Horses pranced in braided manes, their owners dressed in starched jeans and shining boots. Trailers lined the parking lots like silver ships docked in a noisy harbor. Eli parked in the farthest corner, away from the polished stalls and glossy posters. He didn't want to draw attention. Not yet. As he lowered the trailer ramp, Valor stepped out into a world unlike anything he'd seen in years. The clatter of hooves, the scent of sweet feed and leather, the sound of children laughing and announcers calling out names over the loudspeakers. It all swirled around him like a storm of memory and noise. His muscles tensed. His eyes darted. But he stayed. Eli led him gently through the grounds, nodding politely at the glances, ignoring the whispers. Some looked at the scars still faintly visible under Valor's coat and turned away. Others stared, confusion painted across their faces, as if unsure why a horse like that was even there. One woman in a tailored vest leaned toward a friend and muttered, "Poor thing, looks like it just crawled out of a ditch." Eli heard her. So did Valor. But he didn't break stride. In the warm-up ring, they moved with cautious rhythm. Eli guided Valor through slow turns, soft halts, gentle transitions. There were no dramatic maneuvers, no high-stepping displays. Just quiet cooperation. Trust. An older man watched them from the fence line. His hat shaded deep-set eyes, and his weathered hands held a clipboard. Eli noticed him but didn't acknowledge it. They had more important things to focus on. As the time for their category neared, Eli led Valor toward the staging area. Most of the other competitors were on high-blooded horses, groomed to perfection. Their saddles shone under the lights. Their riders laughed confidently, tossing polished helmets between them. Eli wore his old boots, scuffed and cracked. His shirt was freshly washed but threadbare at the cuff. The saddle on Valor was borrowed and slightly too big. But it held. They were called third. Eli took a deep breath and guided Valor through the gate into the arena. The crowd was restless, distracted, chatting between themselves. But when they saw the scarred horse walking quietly beside the lanky boy with the steady gaze, the noise dulled. Not silent, but curious. They moved through the pattern slowly, each step deliberate. Eli didn't rush. Valor didn't falter. Together, they traced the prescribed figure with calm precision. There were no flourishes, no bold commands, only subtle communication, a conversation built on months of patience and silent struggle. Near the end, a loud bang echoed from somewhere behind the stands. A balloon popping, maybe. A chair tipping over. Valor flinched, his head jerking up. His ears pinned back. A tremble ran down his flanks. Eli stopped. Not yanked or pulled, just stood still. He reached out, laid his hand on Valor's shoulder, and whispered something only the horse could hear. The gelding's breathing slowed. His legs steadied. And together they resumed. When they finished, there was no roar of applause, no gasps of amazement. But there was silence. Respectful, weighted silence. The kind that meant people had seen something real. They left the arena without looking back. Outside the ring, the older man with the clipboard approached. "You train him yourself?" he asked, voice gravelly. Eli nodded. "Where'd you get him?" "Auction." The man studied Valor for a long time, then nodded once. "Got more heart than most horses here." Eli said nothing. He didn't know how to accept a compliment like that. Later, the results were pinned to a corkboard near the concession stand. They didn't win. Didn't place. Their name wasn't even on the honorable mentions list. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the girl with the pink ribbon in her hair who walked over, eyes wide, and asked, "Is that the horse from the auction? The one no one wanted?" Eli nodded. She smiled, eyes shining. "He's beautiful." The simple words struck harder than any trophy. As the sun began to set, Eli walked Valor back to the trailer. A few people stopped to offer nods, quiet encouragement, or just a second glance. It was enough. In the trailer, Valor stood steady for the ride home. No hesitations this time. That night, back at the barn, Eli unbuckled the halter and rubbed the soft spot behind Valor's ears. "You did good," he whispered. "You did real good." Valor pressed his head lightly against Eli's chest and sighed. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it a sense of change. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet kind that stays. Over the next few weeks, something shifted in the rhythm of their days. The paddock was greener now, the fences stronger. Eli had picked up odd jobs, hauling hay, mending fences, cleaning out stalls at other farms. He saved every dollar, pouring it back into the barn. One evening, a truck pulled into the driveway. The old man from the show stepped out, holding a brown paper bag. Inside was a halter, new, leather, well-made. And a note. For the horse that reminded me why I started riding in the first place. Valor wore that halter with pride. Word spread slowly. People began to call Eli, asking for help with their own difficult horses. Not because he was the best, but because he understood. He didn't force. He didn't judge. He listened. And valor was his testament. One day, a woman arrived with a young colt, nervous, skittish, rejected by 2 trainers already. She watched Eli work for hours, never rushing, always kind. When the colt finally touched his nose to Eli's hand, she asked, "How did you learn to do this?" Eli looked over at Valor, grazing peacefully in the field, and smiled. From someone no one believed in. That night, Eli sat under the stars, leaning against the barn wall, sketching again. Not a list this time. Not goals or plans. Just pictures. Of horses running, of wide open pastures, of a barn filled with second chances. And in the corner of the page, a small drawing of a boy and a horse standing side by side. No one else might ever see it. But that didn't matter. Because the journey wasn't about being seen. It was about seeing. Seeing what could be healed. Seeing what others missed. And more than anything, seeing the beauty in something broken. A soft nicker drew his attention. Valor stood at the gate, watching him. The wind had picked up, sweeping across the open land in playful gusts that tossed Eli's hair and ruffled the golden grass around the barn. He leaned on the weathered fence, watching Valor in the field. The gelding moved with ease now, fluid, graceful, light on his feet like the weight of his past had been shed in layers. But Eli knew it wasn't gone, not entirely. Scars didn't vanish. They just stopped hurting. It had been 6 months since the show. The world hadn't changed overnight, but their small corner of it had grown. A new stall had been built beside Valor's, and tools once rusted and forgotten now hung in neat rows inside the barn. People came, not out of pity, but out of hope. They brought horses no one else wanted, angry, scared, shut down. Horses like Valor had once been. And Eli welcomed them all. Each one tested him in different ways. A mare named Junebug had thrown him into a trough on day 1. A gelding with a jagged scar across his eye refused to eat unless Eli sat nearby. There were moments he doubted himself, nights he lay awake wondering if he'd taken on too much. But every morning, he woke up and tried again. Because that's what Valor had done. And if a horse like that could keep going, so could he. Still, something lingered, something unresolved. The auction. The place where it had all begun. He hadn't returned since that first day, the day he saw a trembling skeleton of a horse sold for a few dollars, dismissed like a broken object. But now, something pulled at him. Not revenge, not even closure, just a feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was another story waiting there. One he was meant to be a part of. He didn't tell anyone when he hitched the trailer and drove out early that morning. The gravel road felt familiar under the tires, and the crooked sign out front still read Tri-County Livestock Auction every Saturday. Same peeling paint, same smell of hay and diesel, and something more bitter. He parked at the edge of the lot and walked toward the pens. The air buzzed with chatter and shouting, the rhythmic thud of hooves echoing against tin walls. It was as loud and chaotic as he remembered, but this time, he walked with purpose. Eyes steady, shoulders square. Some of the same handlers were there, men with cigarettes hanging from their lips, brushing down frightened animals with quick, impersonal stroke. Eli passed them quietly, scanning the pens. Then he saw her. Small, thin, and shaking. A roan filly barely old enough to be weaned. Her ribs showed through patchy fur, and her eyes were wide with terror. She was backed into a corner, flinching at every movement. People passed her by without a second glance. One man laughed and muttered something about dog food. Eli stepped forward. She didn't run, just stared at him like she couldn't believe he was real. He crouched down, slowly, speaking in a soft voice he'd used 100 times before. The filly blinked, her nostrils flaring, and after a moment she inched forward. Not trust, just curiosity. But that was enough. He found the auction manager and asked about her. Nobody's bid on her, the man said with a shrug. She's probably not gonna sell. Might just send her out the back if no one bites. Eli didn't ask what out the back meant. He already knew. He handed over what little cash he had. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Back at the pen, he opened the gate and led the filly out slowly. Her legs were unsteady, but she followed him. Not because she trusted him, but because she had no choice. Trust would come later. Hopefully. It was late when they got back. The sun had dropped below the hills, leaving the barn bathed in a soft blue light. Valor stood at the gate, ears perked. When he saw the filly, he didn't react with alarm. Just watched. Eli unloaded her carefully and led her into the quarantine stall he'd prepared earlier. Clean hay. Fresh water. A bucket of soaked feed. She hesitated, sniffed, and finally stepped inside. Valor let out a quiet nicker. Eli turned and looked at him. Yeah, he said softly, I think she's gonna be okay. Over the next few weeks, the filly, whom Eli named Wren, began to change. Not dramatically. Not like in the movies, but in small, steady ways. She stopped trembling when the wind blew. She lifted her head more often. And one morning she ate from Eli's hand. Valor was never far. He'd stand by the gate, watching Wren with a kind of silent guardianship. Sometimes, Eli swore he saw the older gelding glance at him with something close to pride. As spring unfolded, the farm grew busier. A girl from town started coming by after school to help muck stalls. A retired vet offered to do checkups at a discount. A feed store owner began donating supplies once a month. Word had gotten around about the boy who'd bought a broken horse, and the horse who helped fix broken things in return. But for Eli, it wasn't about the attention. It was about mornings like this one, mist hanging low, Wren trotting in circles around a training pen, Valor watching from the shade, and the sound of hooves on soft dirt. A rhythm. A heartbeat. He leaned on the fence, sipping coffee from a tin mug, and thought about how far they'd come. He still didn't have a trophy. Still wore the same beat-up boot. But he had something better. He had purpose. One day, a woman arrived with a young boy who barely spoke. The child had lost his father, the woman explained. Wouldn't go near people. But he liked horses. Eli introduced him to Wren. The boy didn't say a word that day. Just stood by the stall, watching. But he came back the next day. And the next. A week later, Eli saw the boy sitting cross-legged in the pasture, Wren standing close, her nose resting gently against his back. That evening, Eli stood with Valor under a sky turning gold and violet. You started all this, he said. Valor swished his tail and pressed against his side. And Eli smiled. Not because everything was perfect. Not because the past didn't still whisper at the edges of his mind. But because, in that moment, he understood something he hadn't before. It wasn't just about saving a horse. It was about being saved. By something silent. Something powerful. Something that didn't demand anything except patience and heart. Later that year, Eli was invited to speak at a small horse expo. He almost said no. But then he remembered the auction. The filly. The boy. And he went. He stood before a modest crowd, farmers, trainers, kids, parents, and told the story. Not of winning shows or making money. But of a horse who had been thrown away, and a boy who saw something worth saving. He spoke of how that horse had taught him patience, courage, how to listen. When he finished, the room was quiet. Then a man in the back stood and clapped. Slowly, others joined in. And for a moment, Eli didn't feel like a kid with hand-me-down clothes and calloused hands. He felt like someone who mattered. Driving home that night, he looked over at the passenger seat, where Valor's halter rested, worn but clean. He didn't need to say anything. The silence was full. Back at the barn, Wren greeted him with a soft nicker. The other horses stirred in their stalls, the barn filled with the sound of breathing, shuffling life. Eli stepped into Valor's stall, sat down on the straw, and leaned back against the wood. Not bad, he murmured. Valor lowered his head and nuzzled his shoulder. Outside, the stars blinked into place. And somewhere out there, in some dusty lot or crowded pen, another horse waited.